Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today is episode number 8 of Geeks, Drop the Gauntlet. I'm J-Rad, this is...
Ben Riley.
I don't even want to talk about it. I don't even want to... Well, we're going to have to. So today's video is going to be all about my man, Mr. Peter Parker, or I guess Ben Riley, Spider-Man, better known as Spider-Man. So today what we're going to talk about are the different comic book storylines that have been our favorites. So I think we each chose 3, and we're going to talk about our favorites, when, why, how, all that good stuff.
We also are probably going to go over a few of our least favorites.
Oh, yeah.
But,
well, yeah.
Okay, before
Can you tell from the Ben Riley thing?
Right. Before we go too far, though, this episode is sponsored by TNK Comics. Make sure that you swing by the Ontario Comic Con. It's Ontario, California. And say hi to them. And yeah.
Let them know that Geeks Drop the Gauntlet sent them.
And
sent you.
We'll tag the Instagram. It sent him.
It sent him.
We'll tag the Instagram in the post at the bottom.
Yep. So
Spider-Man has had a rich history. He's been around for like 60 years now. And we have seen him grow from this 14-year-old kid that gets bit by a spider, a bully, and all this stuff. And we've seen several iterations. And when Spider-Man hits, they hit. Like the writers, everything. It's just, it's amazing. And they've had a couple of misses too.
Yes, they have. One of the top misses for me, and I think it might be for you as well, just straight from our beginning of that with Ben Riley, is I got lost, like literally lost. Well, can we call it the Clone Wars?
The Clone Wars. That's fitting, except I don't want to tarnish Star Wars with that one.
Agreed. But I just thought that was a little bit of a the way it started in the beginning in regards to these clones that had the same powers, and I forgot who was the name of the guy who started it, who cloned Peter.
The Jackal.
The Jackal. But my whole point is it started with some potential, and as it moved along, I think it just either they lost themselves, as in the writers didn't know what was going on anymore. And and if you've got the writers not really following what's going on, not really wanting to do this, you've got the consumer not really knowing what's going on. It just created this convoluted mess that, as to this day, I'm lost. I actually did a little research on that, read over a few of the like story arcs involving the clones and Kane and Ben Riley and all that. And I was reading some of the description, the synopsis of some of these, and I'm like, but I'm confused. And that's just reading, that's not even reading the stories, that's reading a small little blurb.
So the Clone Saga went from 1994 to 1996. And in order to really explain what goofed up here, we have to go back to, I believe it was 1981, when Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson got married.
Okay, yep.
And at the time, everybody was getting married. Clark Kent was getting married, Lois Lane, and all this stuff. And
Batman was,
yeah, whatever. So anyway, at the time, it seemed like a great idea. And honestly, the readers were very happy with that decision. It was one of those soap opera situations where the readers were happy that Spider-Man, or Peter Parker, gets his happily ever after getting dragged through the mud for his entire life up to that point. And while it was great for the readers to see it, for the writers, it was a real nightmare, because it turns Spider-Man, which should be a fun comic for mostly teenage readers, into kind of an adult drama that you have adult problems where Mary Jane is waiting at home and she's worried that Peter is out fighting crime, and they have relationship issues where he's swinging around with Black Cat, who he previously had a relationship, and Mary Jane needs to be comfortable with that, and she needs to trust him, and blah, blah, blah. It was rough. And I understand where writers were coming from not wanting to do this. I personally was a big fan of their marriage. So the Clone Saga originally by, or as stated by Quesada, I think, is that it was supposed to be kind of a 3-month run. And it was going to be that Peter Parker was cloned by the Jackal 40 years prior to that, in like the 80s or 70s or something like that. And for the last Oh, and then they fought each other, Peter Parker and this clone, and one of them was buried in rock. And you're not really sure who it was.
So it was the real one or not?
And so 40 years later, we're going to find out that it was actually the clone who survived, and Peter Parker was buried in rock. So the clone was the one who ended up marrying Mary Jane, and in a nutshell, they wanted the clone to go off with Mary Jane and live a life, and then Peter Parker, who was buried under the rock, who is now going by Ben Reilly, would be the new Spider-Man. So I don't know if they were going to switch names or whatever, but it was a way to.
That just doesn't even make sense.
Right. It was a way to be done with the marriage, and then the clone Peter Parker and Mary Jane could go just live happily ever after and do whatever they're going to do.
Just shuffle them off.
Yeah.
So they can bring Spider-Man back.
Yeah. So
to his roots.
The comics ended up selling very well. And so what was going to be a 3-month run ended up being a 2-year run.
Yeah.
It was convoluted. There were characters introduced named like Judas Traveler, who nobody knows why they were there or what they were supposed to do, and then nobody knows what they're doing now. It doesn't really matter. Nobody cares. They resurrected Norman Osborn, and resurrected is the wrong word because he apparently survived when he got hit by his own glider in 122, and allowed his son to die as he watched from the wings and knew all this stuff about Peter Parker and never stepped in to change anything. And it made no sense whatsoever why Norman Osborn, this genius, would just sit back and watch all of this crap unfold for 40 years before he came back. So this and probably Onslaught were probably the two biggest convoluted, long-winded cluster Fs that have ever existed in Marvel. And I honestly, that was a point where I stopped reading Spider-Man.
Yeah.
That was the last story I read. And I don't think I even finished it. I was just too frustrated
I never
with
finished it. I never finished it.
So Peter and Mary Jane's marriage did not end in that. And it turned out that, they were faking it. The ones that was buried was the clone. So we brought up this story for no reason. Peter Parker and Mary Jane stayed married. Ben Reilly fought crime for a little bit longer as Scarlet Spider, and then he died, I believe, and was recently in like 2018
with the multiverse.
Yeah,
thing?
I think he was resurrected.
I think so.
So I think he's still around. Then there was another clone named Kane, and I don't even know what the heck he was doing. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it was a terrible story.
Yes. So and so we're scraping the bottom of the barrel here, right? That's the low end. Now the fortunate thing with Spider-Man is there wasn't 3 to pick from, and that was the worst. No, there was a multitude.
Yes.
So that is probably what we at least considered kind of our worst, and it was bad for me too because that was right around the time. So just to give you a little backstory of me, real quick in about 4 sentences, when I was growing up, I was all Marvel, comic book reading wise. So it was Spider-Man and X-Men mostly growing up. And then in my adult life, I have read a lot less Marvel and a lot more DC. So that's where I am now. That being said, when you're younger, when you're a kid, and I'm picking up this Clone Saga issue, when I first picked it up, it was like, ooh, more Spider-Man equals good, right? No. Because you're a kid. You're like, more Spider-Man equals good. This is going to be amazing. And for like a 12-year-old trying to read through that, I got so it was tough. And I put it down, and like I said, I never finished it. And as I got older, I kind of went back, did some research even recently, and it was just like, what is this? Now we're taking that and we're going to compare it to these that we've come up with of our favorites. It is a night and day difference in my opinion. Some of these I have in here for mine at least are amazing. They are absolutely amazing. So, do you want to kick us off with your top 3? Or do you want me to do?
I have one more bone to pick. It has to be mentioned.
Okay.
One More Day is...
I'm not super familiar with that one.
In a nutshell, Aunt May was shot and killed.
Okay.
And Peter Parker made a deal with Mephisto, and Mephisto said, I can bring Aunt May back. 90,000-year-old Aunt May, I can bring her back. But your marriage to Mary Jane is going to be over. And it's like she never knew you.
You're right. Okay, I know
the interesting thing is that this story is hated. It came out in 2007. It's by many critics the worst story written in 2007. Now, there were a few things that had also happened. Peter Parker had revealed his identity to the world in Civil War, and then Aunt May got killed. But in order to erase his identity from everybody's minds and then bring Aunt May back, he made this deal to end his marriage with Mary Jane. They talked about it, and then everybody forgot who Peter Parker was, and that was it. So that sounds familiar.
Yeah, the
even
movie.
Even though it was a hated storyline in comics,
they still pulled from it.
Yeah, they pulled from it to do No Way Home,
Yep.
and it was touching in No Way Home.
It was,
but
very much
there
so.
wasn't. They weren't progressed to that, like Mary Jane and Peter were not at that point, and you just kind of were waiting for them to get together, and it was heartbreaking to see that not happen for him, and now Peter Parker's alone in the movies.
Right.
In the One More Day, the frustrating aspect is rather than have these two adults in their marriage in an adult, realistic way, it happened from supernatural means.
Yeah.
And I understand from a writer's perspective, nobody wants to be the one who ends that marriage, the writer that ends the marriage, because it was popular with readers, but it needed to be ended. So they just ended it. And so that's
supernatural means,
that's how that ended. So we're going to pick up basically in some different areas. I think that one of the stories we picked was kind of an attempt to recover readers after a very unsuccessful Clone Saga.
Yeah.
To reintroduce readers to the mythos. So I'll kick things off.
Yeah, go for it.
So my third favorite storyline is the Superior Spider-Man storyline.
Okay, yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Superior Spider-Man took place in, I think it was Spider-Man 700, or Amazing Spider-Man 700. Doc Ock at this point is old. He is riddled with like disease and everything, and he wasn't doing well.
Yeah.
And he was on his deathbed, but he had rigged up a trap to transfer his consciousness into Spider-Man's body and then Spider-Man's consciousness into his. And then at that point, his body would die along with Peter Parker or Spider-Man's personality. And then while he was in Spider-Man's body, he took advantage of Peter Parker's intellect and his relationships and his youth and like the connections he had as Spider-Man, and he made Peter Parker into a better person. He had these spider bots that would go around town and stop crime. He sort of worked on his marriage with Mary Jane, but he ended up like potentially having an affair because the Doc Ock part fell in love with this woman named Anna Maria Marconi, who was a scientist that he worked with. And the funny thing is that he invented a whole bunch of stuff and started Parker Industries.
Yes.
And then somebody who was an advocate for Doc Ock sued him because they said that Peter Parker was stealing Doc Ock's ideas, which I thought was a really funny thing. But anyway, it was written in January 2013 to September 2014. It went for 31 issues. It was written by Dan Slott with 3 artists, Ryan Stegman, Humberto Ramos, and Giuseppe Caminoli. And it basically, Peter Parker's consciousness started resurfacing towards the end of it, and he ended up taking back his body. I cannot remember what happened to Doc Ock, his consciousness.
I thought, I don't remember either. I thought that it was like there was like this dissipation of his consciousness to the point where he was gone. But then there was, I thought towards the end there was...
I think he still kind of existed in him.
Well, that was the thing. I thought towards the end of the run or something, there was like this, it alluded to the fact he was still there.
Yeah.
But like somewhere deep in his subconscious or something. And
he came back for a couple of one-shots where like his consciousness kind of resurfaced. And the big difference is that Superior Spider-Man killed people.
Oh yeah.
He
didn't really
beat
pull
them
his
to
punches.
death. He did not. Like he was what the Azrael Batman was in the whatever that Batman story
where he
is.
just didn't hold back.
It's not that kind of shit. We don't know the Batman stories. Anyway, he killed people, and he ended up falling on the wrong side of the Avengers because of it and everything. But man, I really love that story because it was cool to see that like Doc Ock actually admired Peter Parker's intelligence as he was in that body, and he was like, why has this kid never done this? Like, never become what he could become. And it was cool to see a driven Peter Parker, sort of, making money, like solving that whole issue that Peter Parker has with money and everything, having some healthy relationships, and being okay with not having as much responsibility accompanying that power.
Right. The one thing that really had such a weight on his shoulders.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Plus, I love the costume.
Yes,
I really love the costume.
With the kind of jagged webs and the black and the arms coming out of the back, which again was kind of a look that they adopted for the Spider-Man, the movie in the MCU.
Yeah, I that's a great choice. I actually really like that run. That was really good. All right, well, my number 3 then is actually I chose a novel. It is a storyline. It is a storyline in comic books. Well, it's not necessarily a comic book, but it's a novel. Anyways, point is there is a trilogy that was written by Adam Troy Castro back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it was Spider-Man, the Sinister Six trilogy. Now, I will tell you this. I read the first book, I read the second book, I never read the third one. The one I'm going to be talking about today is the second one, which left a huge impact and actually had resolution at the end. Therefore, when I heard the third one came out, and well, at the time I was reading this, all 3 were already out. But when I heard about the third one, because I thought it ended, I didn't even know there was a third book, because I don't know, I was stupid. And when I found out there was a third one, I was like, yeah, but like, I felt like there was some decent resolution at the end of the second one, so I just didn't do it. I didn't need to move on to the third one. Anyways, point is my review is going to be of the second book, which was entitled Revenge of the Sinister Six, again by Adam Troy Castro. In the year 2000 it came out. And in the first book, it was actually kind of funny because the first book was putting the Sinister Six together. It's literally called The Gathering of the Sinister Six. The first book wasn't even about the Sinister Six. Mysterio had his own vendetta, his own plan that he was carrying out. That was like 90% of the first book. And I was like, for calling it the Sinister Six, like
the Sinister One.
Yeah, it didn't do anything. I mean, yes, it did some things. It introduced new characters like the Gentleman and Pity. And Pity was a female character that there was some... You
felt sorry for her.
Yeah, you felt real sorry for her. That it was alluding to the fact that there was more between her and Peter. Her and Spider-Man. Something there. Like, what is it?
Peter and Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
Well, okay. I'm just saying, Black Widow only won Spider-Man.
That's true. But let's just say there's a relationship there that it was just alluded to. You didn't know what. It wasn't a love interest, but there was just something there. And the Gentleman was pretty cool too. He's this mysterious benefactor, sitting in the back orchestrating stuff.
Was he well dressed?
Actually, yes. He was.
With a monocle?
Yes.
Nice.
No. But anyways, so introduce the second book. Second book comes in. The Six actually had been gathered at the end of the first book, so they're actually there. And now they are going to enact their plans. Well, obviously, one of the biggest plans is to destroy Spider-Man, punish him for being him, and for foiling all their plans all the time. You suck. But the Gentleman also had another huge plan, and make a long story short, it was going to destroy New York City. That was the whole idea, and they were going to make a lot of money off of it. Didn't really make sense there, but you know what? Let's just go with the fact that...
If everybody's dead, you can go into the banks and just take it.
That's true, but it had to do with like this cyclone, this weather thing. Like, if you destroy all the buildings, you destroy everything in the city, including what's in the buildings, where are you getting this money from? Anyways, make a long story short is some people may look at the story and be like, okay, well, that didn't quite make sense. But what I loved it for was...
He was an insurance adjuster.
Yeah, okay. Then he's going to make a bunch of money. But what I actually really liked it for is the specific interactions between the Six, between Spider-Man, and then also, like we were talking about, this was a novel. So it went into detailed parts about Peter and Mary Jane's marriage. And like how much of a toll it put on both of them, including Mary Jane, obviously. In fact, in this book, she's dealing with like pills addiction. He's dealing with literally struggling with putting on his suit every day and going out web slinging and dealing with the issues before even the Six really show up. Just his normal everyday trying to stop crime, and her worrying and seeing him get beat to death on TV when the Six do show up. Anyways, so all that I thought was really cool. And then what really affected me too was for a novel how good the descriptions of the battles were and the way they set it up.
Yeah, that's always hard to picture.
The Six and the comic books do a great job with that, obviously, because they're pictured. Their art is, you have art there to really, oh, that's exactly what happened. But the cool thing with the novel is not only did they do a good job describing it so that I could picture it in my head, the novel, obviously, you're going to have way more in depth on the words. And so you build a real true story. And the cool part with this was that the Six actually went through to different parts of his history in the city where he failed and set up battles there, set up things like there was one on the George Washington Bridge where Gwen died and all that, and I can't remember if it was Ock or who started that, but they held a hostage there and they forced him to come and you know, you're gonna relive your greatest failures, and they did it multiple times, and this takes a big effect on his psyche and all that. And so I just thought that the whole way they told the story was cool. There's an end fight that I thought was awesome that they actually sort of tried to replicate. Talk about pulling little things like in the movie with Mysterio, not No Way Home, but what was the second Spider-Man movie?
Far From Home.
Far From Home, where Mysterio, where Spider-Man's blinded and with the drones, and he had to go, it was pitch black, and he had to rely fully on his spider sense. There's a part in here where Pity, using her powers, I believe it was her that used her powers, they're in this building, and she blacked out his vision, and he can't see anything, and the Six can, and this was all 6 of them, and they were attacking him. And he was getting pummeled, and he fully releases all his everything that he's dealing with, all these other things, and just 100% like focused right on his spider sense. And the way they described it in the book, you'd have to read it, I think is so cool. And all of a sudden they're like, how the hell can he see? He dodged everything in his landing strikes and just started going nuts, and actually put 3 out of the 6 in the hospital, like completely brutalizing. Like he just let it go. He let go, went all into it. Anyways, thought it was a fantastic story. Pity, actually, the relationship I was talking about is she is supposedly his long lost sister. He actually had a sister, and the gentleman actually orchestrated.
Pity Parker?
Yeah, Pity Parker, Pee-Pee. And the gentleman was the one who orchestrated his parents' death.
Peter.
So I just thought there was a lot of cool things that they could have tied into and you know, really maybe they did this in the 3rd book and really expanded on it, but I thought the way they ended it kind of left some cool questions where you kind of as the reader had to be like, I think that's what they meant, you know, kind of things. And I just thought overall as a whole, as a novel, it was one of the better Spider-Man novels I've read. There aren't too many novels.
Did you read it or was it audio?
No, I actually read this one. I had the hardbound book when I was younger. Yeah, I didn't even have Audible when I was like a teenager, but I had the hardbound book, and like I carried it with me everywhere.
I'm getting the Audible book. That's it.
I was like 13. I was like, Heismaning everyone away, but I love that book. So I had to bring that up in my top 3 because that actually had a huge impact on my younger years as a Spider-Man fan.
Nice.
So
it's a good choice.
All right. So I think it's your number 2.
Yeah. So this is probably one of the first stories I can remember reading of Spider-Man, and really got me into Spider-Man comics anyway. And I mean, I was aware of Spider-Man. I watched like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends every morning and everything. I've always loved Spider-Man. I remember waiting in line at like a Mervyn's or something like that when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and I met I met him. Yeah, I met Spider-Man. It was cool. My mom has a picture.
This is the first you're telling me this?
I might have to.
Oh my God.
I might have to find that picture because it's legit. But so anyway, yeah, I met Spider-Man when I was younger, and I was always a fan. I remember trying to paint this little model when I was a kid, and it looked like garbage. But at any rate, it was this comic because the cover of it had Spider-Man breaking out of a grave. Where he was coming up out, and like the obvious assumption is that he got killed. Yeah. And you have Spider-Man rising up as a zombie Spider-Man. How the hell did he get killed? Like, what the hell's going on here? Yeah. And I remember I was at a Circle K and I had to buy this, and it was probably episode 3 or 4, maybe 5 of this 6-issue arc, and I was like, well, I got to get them all, so I went on a hunt, and then I started hunting all the comic books because one story led to another, and I fell down that rabbit hole real quick. The story I'm talking about is Thy Fearful Symmetry, Kraven's Last Hunt. Yes. And Thy Fearful Symmetry refers to William Blake's poem, The Tiger. And that's actually referenced quite a few times. Like lines of it are referenced throughout the entire thing. The tiger being kind of a reference to Kraven as a hunter. Yep. And the story's by J.M. DeMatteis and Mike Zeck. It came out in 1987. Went through Web of Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man. It's a 6-issue series, and it's Craven is tired of losing to Spider-Man, and he wants to prove that he can be better at Spider-Man or than Spider-Man at something, and he's decided he's going to be better than Spider-Man at being Spider-Man. The only way to do that is to get rid of Spider-Man.
Beat him, yeah.
So there's a sewer dweller named Vermin who is taking people off the street and consuming them.
I think so.
And Spider-Man and Captain America have to team up to subdue Vermin, and Vermin escapes. And then Spider-Man's swinging around the city, and he is shot by Craven with a dart. You don't know that at the time, though. It does appear that Spider-Man is dead.
Yeah.
But he's shot with a dart and buried alive. And Craven then puts on Spider-Man's costume and basically gets Vermin on his own and beats Vermin within an inch of his life. And so Craven is satisfied that he could do Spider-Man's job better than him because Spider-Man needed Captain America's help to even get Craven.
Get it.
Right, and they didn't really keep him there and everything. So Craven gets this Vermin and beats the snot out of him, takes him and puts him in a cage. And then a little bit later, Spider-Man wakes up. Oh, meanwhile, like Mary Jane doesn't know what happened to Spider-Man. Like 2 weeks later, or Peter Parker.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, he actually wakes up, digs his way out of this coffin, out of the grave, and he's out, and he's still kind of drugged up and weird and everything, and he has to take out Vermin, and Vermin thinks that this is the Spider-Man that beat him within an inch of his life, and really goes after him in more of a survival instinct kind of thing, and Vermin beats the crap out of Spider-Man. And so again, Craven's reinforcement that he's a better Spider-Man than Spider-Man is. And Spider-Man goes off after Vermin, and Craven, satisfied that he did what he needed to do, and that was his life's goal, puts a gun in his mouth and pulls a trigger. And it is, I remember when that happened, my impression of comics were that it was a bunch of fights and like the Hulk would occasionally throw a car around, but nobody got hurt,
right?
Or killed. They might get hurt, a couple of bruises, nothing Band-Aid couldn't fix.
Yeah.
And that was a real awakening for me. And it was a pretty violent scene in that you see the shadow of the gun going into Craven's mouth, and then the next panel is just blood.
Yeah.
And it was drastic. And I know that J.M. DeMatteis was accused of trivializing suicide, but I didn't feel as a reader.
I don't think so. Really.
No, I did not get that impression.
No.
And it was very impactful.
Yeah.
And Craven didn't even come back for quite a while in comics.
No.
He did eventually return, but
it wasn't until,
and I don't know how.
I don't know.
But
it was like a decade.
It might have been like
Longer
2014 or something.
Yeah.
But this particular storyline has been, again, voted by several critics as the best written story ever. And like the art in it was fantastic. Mike Zeck did a fantastic job. Like it was beautiful, and it was dark, and it was cold, and like the entire thing, it was a moving story. Got me into Spider-Man comics, and it's haunting. Like there are images in there that still are just stuck in my head.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I mean, as bad as they were, but that's what you kind of want.
Yeah.
You want something that resonates, that you're like, when you think back on you're like, oh man, that was rough. I enjoyed that storyline. And you know what I mean? And something that sticks with you like that, you have to give it credit where credit's due.
Absolutely.
And that being said, I'm going to go into my number 2 because it ties in to your number 2 in terms of what I think this comic did for Spider-Man and for the comic book industry.
Okay.
So my number 2 actually took place in 1973, so it's earlier.
Ooh, okay.
This is the night Gwen Stacy died. This is Amazing Spider-Man 122, 123, I believe. And this is a classic. This is a classic. Most people know, I mean, well, the title gives it away what happens. But most people know about this story. And this story has been replicated in movies. This story has been replicated, I mean,
every Spider-Man
Every
movie.
Spider-Man. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Andrew Garfield is probably the most accurate to what really happened. But my biggest thing is I'm not going to go into right now the story itself. We kind of get the idea. It was Spider-Man at his lowest. Spider-Man ends up fighting Green Goblin. They're on a bridge. Green Goblin has Gwen Stacy, throws Gwen Stacy off. Spider-Man goes to save her. He fires a web, which normally in normal times, we'll call it, is a snag, gotcha, we're good. What happens in this scenario is she is falling, at terminal velocity off this bridge, right? He's able to fire a web. It snags her heel, which is good. But as you know, if you snag something that's falling and it goes taut immediately, there is a whiplash effect to whatever you're grabbed onto. Well, this was a human and it snapped her neck. She died instantly. Now this also, there was another major death in there too, Goblin actually as well.
Gwen Stacy's father, Captain Stacy.
Yes. So Green Goblin was, I think what this did is...
No, he didn't die though.
No,
Green
I'm
Goblin
saying...
he was just lurking in the shadows.
You're right.
For 40 years.
You're right. But no, I'm saying what this did though that I thought was cool is not only did it set up as in... I think it kind of moved Green Goblin as probably one of his greater nemesis, greater enemies, that is transpired throughout the rest of his history. Kind of when you think of Spider-Man villains, he comes up as
he's Spider-Man's Joker.
Top. Yes, towards the top. So not only did it do that, this was one of the first times in comics where there was some real consequences. Like you had mentioned before, a lot of times I feel like comic books were kind of, especially in Inception in the 30s, we'll say, really started coming and moved on. It was designed for kids. That's how it felt to me, at least. Especially when you read some older ones, you're like, it's pretty kiddie. This one, yeah, it still kind of was, I guess, if you want to call it. But if you read through it, I mean, it had a little more adult tones to it. What I think it did is at least I believe, is it opened the door for more writers to take more risks. And what I mean by that is to make things maybe a little more adult, make things a little darker, make things a little more quote unquote realistic in a fantasy world. Open the door for Kraven's Last Hunt, which I thought was this kind of leads into, wow, like one of the first times I ever remember, and if you were reading in 1987, I wasn't alive yet, but if you were reading like that at that point when it came out, that has to be one of the first open suicide looking panels in a comic book. And would they take that risk before, if that was the very first death, major death? I don't know, but I feel like this kind of opened the door, and one of the things I really have to appreciate with Spider-Man is because he has such a great history, if we're talking over 50 years of history, coming up on 100 years of history, the progression from, kiddie to extremely adult, I think this opened the door for that. And so for that reason, I didn't read this until, 2000 or something, It just was impactful because it was widely regarded as a great story. I've read a bunch of things while I was doing research on this. A lot of critics love this arc, and I can see why. And so I had to put it as my number 2, just strictly because of the fact that I think not just even for Spider-Man, but in comics in general, this really paved the way into comics that I enjoy now, which are more adult, more darker, or are darker and are more adult, which as an adult, I still love comics, but I would like them to be a little more realistic, and they've done that.
Yeah.
Especially a lot of DC stuff. This is why I'm reading a lot of DC now as an adult. There's a lot of, I read a few Batman storylines recently that are dark. Like, holy smokes. And you know what? Yeah. I appreciate that. I do. Sometimes they can go a little overboard, but I appreciate that. So I really enjoyed this storyline for what it did.
Yeah, and I'll bring up some kind of interesting things. So the Comic Book Authority was basically the ratings authority that we deal with movies and everything, and they were kind of the be all end all. That Marvel Comics and DC Comics and everybody had to pay the comic book authority to have them approve a comic, and because of that, there couldn't be any like nudity or sexual suggestions or violence or blood or anything. And so back then in what was it, 70s, it was more restrictive than it got a little bit later, because even Kraven's Last Hunt was still regulated by the comic book authority. So the interesting thing was, when you read Amazing Spider-Man number 122 and Gwen Stacy dies, it was not very clear how she died. There was a lot of debate on if she died from fright, from falling off there, or if Green Goblin had done something to her before he let her go, and she was dead basically as soon as she was released, or if Spider-Man catching her broke her neck. So it wasn't clear, and they couldn't be clear because it was a death in a comic, and it couldn't be a violent death. So there wasn't like a crack that you would see or anything like that. And he pulled her up, and Peter Parker, Spider-Man, could not understand why she was dead. He was holding her basically at the top of the bridge, and he just didn't know how it happened. And that was interesting. So whenever you did see Amazing Spider-Man 2, man, that hit really hard to see, like, Gwen Stacy hit her head on the ground, or that snap of the neck, or a combination of both. But it was, man, that was a rough scene to watch, especially after reading that comic and everything. And then another interesting thing is that happened in Amazing Spider-Man number 22 or 122. And if you look at the time on the clock, frequently in comics, like when a character, like one of the women characters in Spider-Man movies is in trouble, and I think even in that scene, it was 1:22 a.m. And that's crazy. That's just cool. That attention to detail.
You know, pay homage to the greats, and this was cool. And even, you know, going specifically right back to the comic itself and what happened afterward, it was pretty cool to see how Spider-Man dealt with it, because this added a lot of guilt and weight on his shoulders moving forward. So anyways, it just, to me, it opened the doors for a lot of different things to transpire and to kind of get a little darker and watch someone who you care about reading comics. I cared about Spider-Man, and how he handled himself, and how was he able to keep putting the mask on and keep going type thing. And, you know, that's kind of inspiring. So that I really love that one.
And Gwen Stacy became that good all-American girl that was never going to survive in Peter Parker's world, because there were several iterations of Gwen Stacy that were killed. In fact, it even happened in the next series, which we actually are in agreement.
We agree on our number one.
With the number one series. And it was the entire run of Ultimate Spider-Man. And it was Brian Michael Bendis writing, and Mark Bagley was the artist. And Mark Bagley draws a very innocent, childlike face and interaction, and it was Peter Parker as a kid. And Ultimate Spider-Man was designed to allow people to catch up on the Spider-Man in the Spider-Man universe, who hadn't read 50 years of comics that had come before, but they wanted to understand where Peter Parker came from.
Call it a soft reboot.
Really.
That's what the Ultimate Universe is.
And but it was more updated. So you didn't deal with like the whole nerd laser and whatever the heck they dealt with. And it was more gritty, and it like the art was just fantastic. Brian Michael Bendis is an amazing writer. His dialogue is I can't think of a writer who writes better dialogue.
That's gonna be tough.
And
that's gonna be tough.
And I really, really connected with Spider-Man, even though I was 30-something years old whenever this thing came out. And it was
2011.
It was fun. It was moving. It was exciting. It was fantastic. And even within that, there are storylines that are among the best that have ever been. But the entire series as a whole was my favorite. But you kind of honed in on one.
Well, I mean, let's just be honest. For me, it was the most impactful was the death of Spider-Man. That part of this storyline, that part of that arc of this storyline. To me, number one was I reading this as a soft reboot in my head, as it was. Reading the whole thing, you're like, this is amazing. Like, okay, this is great. I wonder how far they're going to take it. You know what I mean? And it didn't go that far in terms of his age.
No, I think it was number 100.
Yeah. And I just mean his age, like as a kid. Like you're thinking,
Spider-Man, he was 17
right,
maybe.
Spider-Man now, or I think in the comics, he's 30, 40 years old, whatever. This reboot was an amazing storyline of like his high school years, and it didn't even end. He's still in high school when Death of Spider-Man arc happens, and this it was so impactful to me because not only Brian Michael Bendis being one of the greatest writers and like the dialogue and all this, I have seen characters die before, and big characters too in comics. And yeah, you're especially someone you care about. You read it and you're like, wow, that was crazy. Oh. Hey, what are we getting for dinner tonight?
Right.
You know what I mean? Type deal. And it's not that it wasn't super impactful. It was, but it was just it wasn't as impactful as this storyline. This storyline actually hurt me to the point where, and I'm not saying because it was bad, but it hurt to the point where I stopped reading Spider-Man. Like, I just stopped Spider-Man. I was like, that is one hell of an ending.
Yeah, and Spider-Man is Marvel's cash cow.
It is, 100%.
He is the biggest character, and always has been in comics and possibly movies at this point, because No Way Home, I think, was one of the biggest, highest grossing movies of all time. Yeah. And
that's not to say...
Even in the Ultimate Universe that wasn't the 616, you cannot conceive that Marvel would kill Spider-Man.
Right.
And it wasn't a gimmick.
No.
Like,
it wasn't no, he's alive.
Right.
JK.
You're like, oops, sorry, there are 4 of them.
Yeah.
They made clones, and then we revived them. You're like, no, they really killed. He's dead. He's still
gone.
dead.
He's gone. And this is not to say what came after was bad, because I actually, like I said, I stopped reading Spider-Man for a long time. I have read a few of the comics afterwards, because they ended up, the Ultimate Universe did go on a little bit longer, and then they ended up doing this multiverse thing, and anyways, that got convoluted. But the point is Miles Morales came after Peter Parker, and he actually had some really cool storylines, and actually really liked Miles Morales as a character. That all being said,
he came from the Ultimate Universe.
Yes, he came from the Ultimate Universe. That being said, this storyline right here, and what transpires in this storyline, it just immediately takes Spider-Man and Peter Parker and goes, you're on the top. Yeah. Like, this is the greatest. I mean, there's no better way to go out, even when I read this. So, do we want to go into a little bit of detail? Let's go into a little bit of detail here. So, to start things off, I think we'll transpire. I mean, we're not going to tell the whole damn thing, but there was a lot of moving parts. It's not just because there was the Sinister Six. Honestly, there was a bunch of characters that were involved, villains. There was a bunch of stuff going on the side, with Captain America and.
It was the Dark Avengers versus the Avengers.
Yes, and they had the Shield.
Fury had his own group.
Yeah, there was a bunch of stuff involved. Shield was involved. There was another one involved. Safe? No, I'm thinking of something else. But anyways, there's a bunch of moving parts in this. Trying to make a long story short is Spider-Man, also still a teenager, is trying to fit into what he should be doing, who he should be helping, and there's a point in there that I thought was really cool. There's a point where there was the Punisher involved, there was Captain America involved. Long story short is Punisher had an opportunity to take Cap out. Now, he wasn't going to kill him. He actually said he was aiming for his knees, his kneecap. He was gonna take Captain out of the fight, not kill him though. But Spider-Man ends up seeing this transpire. He sees what's about to happen, and without a split second of hesitation, he goes and knocks Captain America out of the way. Now, by doing that and knocking him out and the way his body was, he ends up taking a shot from the Punisher. Yeah. And the coolest part, I thought, which was really cool to me, was how bad the Punisher felt. He's like, I just shot an innocent kid. Like, put me down, put me away. He actually wanted to get taken. Yeah. But anyways, point is you have an extremely injured Spider-Man now who just saved Captain America. All this is going on while Green Goblin had just got out of Triskelion.
And the Green Goblin isn't little skinny Green Goblin. Correct. This guy looks like the Hulk. He's probably 60-ton character, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he throws fireballs like mad. Like, he is his endurance is amazing.
Yes.
Like he's the Hulk with fireballs, basically.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, he even so we get to the point where he breaks out, and I think there was Sandman involved and somebody else was involved. I just call them the Sinister Six. They're villains. Just that doesn't mean, even if there's three, that doesn't mean there's the six.
The Sinister Three.
Yeah, there's the Sinister Three. But anyways, they're involved, and he's going after Spider-Man. I believe Peter learns that Goblin's Norman. Norman learns that Peter's Peter.
Peter's Peter.
That Peter's Peter. That Spider-Man's Peter. So what he ends up doing is he pretty much has this vendetta against him, obviously, and goes after his loved ones. I think Mary Jane finds out about this, calls Peter, and lets him know that Goblin escaped. That's it.
He's in Queens.
And watched, because on TV, she watched him kill Dr. Octavius because he was trying to assemble pretty much a team, pretty much the Sinister Six, to go after Spider-Man. Doc Ock said, I don't have anything against this kid. I'm freaking out. So what does the Goblin do? He kills him. And that just right there has to go with a little bit of like showcase his power. It wasn't even a thought. He just murders him. Like just boom, boom, he's dead. And they catch this on screen because there's this huge fight, obviously this huge breakout. So long story short is Goblin's on the way to take out Peter's loved ones at his home.
And it's also important to note that in this house, it's
Gwen. Superpowered people.
It's Gwen Stacy who is revived. She was killed in Ultimate and then revived, cloned and revived or something. Yeah. Mary Jane might be there.
I can't remember.
No, I think it's
she
Aunt
was
May.
not there.
I think it's Aunt May, Gwen Stacy, and then an
Johnny
Omega
Storm.
level mutant in Iceman.
And
probably one of the most powerful members of the Fantastic Four with
Johnny
Human
Storm.
Torch. And they were there to protect the house.
Yes.
Spider-Man should have been confident that these two exceptionally powerful heat and cold heroes could stop the Green Goblin.
Yeah, and that's to go to show because he does show up and they do throw down. And the Goblin actually gets overpowered. He does get overpowered by the Human Torch. But it was an intense battle. Like, you would think the Torch would just overpower Willem Dafoe's character, like from the first Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, right? You think you've got essentially we'll call him an Omega level mutant as well. But you just have a Human Torch that can just obliterate him. Not to mention you have Iceman standing there who can freeze him and do all this. But it was actually an intense battle. Human Torch does overpower, but it takes a beating. It takes a toll on him. And just that scene in general is amazing. But that is before Spider-Man even shows up. So Spider-Man ends up showing up. This is all, by the way, he's got a bullet in him that he has to web his wounds closed just to be able to web his guts back in so he doesn't bleed out everywhere. And he is literally hobbling, trying to hobbling is walking, but like he's hobbling on his webs, essentially, trying to get back to the house. Webbling. Trying to get back to his home because he's afraid of what they could do even to the Torch and Bobby Drake, and he doesn't think that they might be able to weather the storm. Anyways, so he does show up, okay? So he does show up, and at the time that he shows up, the Goblin was incapacitated, they thought. But he actually wasn't. And I know Sandman was involved as well. I can't remember super specifics. I wrote down just some synopsis, but I wasn't going to write down the whole exact word for word storyline on this. But point is Goblin wakes up. And I believe at this time, before he does, Peter tells Mary Jane, Gwen Stacy, and Aunt May to leave, get out of town. Like, you've got to leave now. So they do end up, after a lot of persuasion, get to the point where they're leaving. And I think they do end up leaving. They were still in the neighborhood. Like, they barely had just left. They were a little clear though. Yeah, they barely just left. Goblin wakes up, and I think he sucker punches the Human Torch. I can't remember, but he takes him out of the equation immediately, and it ends up. I don't remember what Iceman was doing.
Goblin tells Peter that he will never stop coming for his family. Right. And like at that point,
Iceman did.
Peter needs to decide like how this is going to go.
Right. Yeah. I can't remember what happened to Iceman, but point is I do remember he knocks out Human Torch because he actually absorbed some of Human Torch's
fire.
flame.
Yeah.
Anyways, so make a long story short is you have a Green Goblin at his max power potential telling Spider-Man that I'm not going to stop until I punish you by killing all of your family, then I'm going to kill you. A battle ensues, obviously, right? Peter is, we can almost call it mortally wounded. And he is.
Yeah, he might not have even survived.
He might not even survive the bullet because I believe it was like a 50 cal rifle.
Yeah.
he summons the strength somehow within him to go toe-to-toe with an almost Hulk-leveled Green Goblin who is winging fireballs at him. And it was just this epic fight in front of, literally in a neighborhood, in a Queens neighborhood, in front of their freaking home, destroying the streets. And it wasn't until one of the coolest things ever is he finally puts Goblin down to the point where he's not out, but he just knocks him down. And he has this semi that I think he got thrown into originally. And he literally in this scene takes this huge semi truck, lifts it above his head, going to show that he is a literal 20-ton character. And he jumps and smashes this down on the Goblin. And it explodes. And it explodes. And it was just one of the coolest scenes ever where you're like, oh, that was dope. Turn the page, and it exploded in both their faces. He flies across the lawn, and is in a crumbled heap right on the corner. And I do believe that's when, because I know that either Johnny Storm or Bobby Jake were still there because
they were both there.
They did something, and or no, it's when the fight started. They turned around and came back, Mary Jane and Aunt May, because it ends up that Mary Jane's holding Peter in her arms as she gets there, runs over and holds him up, and he's just this broken mess and everything, and he dies in her arms, and it was rough. Now I will say the payout was because I can't remember which happened first, but he dies. But there's a scene where Goblin says one last line, and you're like, you better not be alive, you son of a bitch. And he dies as well. And just the payoff there was like he always was willing to give his life for others. And he did it. And he finally did it. And not saying that that's what he wanted, but he was willing to do that. And finally someone pushed him to the point where he did it. And he saved his family.
And God, okay. Here we go. What is this? Six episodes in a row? I'm going to admit to crying again. So there's a scene at his funeral where Captain America approaches Aunt May and apologizes and tells her that Peter was the most brave man that he ever knew. And you're like, oh, God, that was Captain America.
Rough.
Like that. Yeah, like, it's fun because Captain America isn't my favorite character in comics. No. He's cool in the MCU. Like, I really like what Chris Evans did with him. But you still recognize what Captain America means to comics, and have Captain America come up and tell Aunt May, you're like, oh God, oh God. But that whole series was just beyond fantastic. And I've collected, I got all of the graphic novels. I have them all collected. And like, if you just feel like running through like some great writing, great art, like it, man, I would just pick those up if you get a chance.
Even though we just spoiled it.
Even right. Even if they make like, what are those like collections? It's like the
omnibus.
Omnibus. Yeah, if you can find an omnibus of that, just get it.
Yeah, it's worth it.
It is amazing.
It is my favorite Spider-Man novel to date, or storyline to date.
Well, if we're going to talk about me crying and everything, let's just go ahead and wrap this up.
You're like,
I can't do this anymore. I feel so sad now. But
well, there's a storyline to do it. That's going to make you sad. This was it.
So, man, we've brought up so many good writers and artists. I feel like we should do our next episode on our favorite writers and artists.
Let's keep it in the comic book era here, comic book way to go here. So yeah, tune in for episode number 9 of Geeks Drop the Gauntlet, and in that one we're definitely going to be talking about not just Spider-Man, but we're going to talk about comic books in general. The whole thing. Who are our favorite writers and artists? And I think that one's going to be really awesome because for me personally, I have recently got in I've gone down the rabbit hole pretty far on DC recently, especially with Batman, and I have found some new writers that I am thoroughly impressed with. So I'm ready to talk about that. So that'll be awesome.
And tune in to see if there's a way to make me cry in the next episode, because I'll tell you what, I do.
Yeah, we will. We'll make it cry. If
he
doesn't,
I will have, because I know what one of them is. So
if he doesn't, we'll do a
God,
nipple twist.
No.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. And until next time, I just have one last thing to say, and that is, stay geeky.
That came out my penis.